Good morning, everyone. We're continuing going through the chapter 17 of Swami Kriyananda's biography of Master, Salient Characteristics of the Master. I hope you're enjoying it. I found it extremely interesting. So let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence. We live in this world feeling so solitary, but we know in our hearts that you are always with us. But for reasons we don't understand, we lose that awareness. Break through our confusion. Awaken us to your omnipresent love. Help us in every way to live in constant remembrance of thee. Om. Peace. Amen. So, when I was commenting earlier that I say that I find this interesting, it's not that I haven't read this book. I've read it in multiple different forms, and I even actually, I believe at one point gave a class on this very chapter some years ago. But the nature of spiritual understanding is that it's ever new. Master's actual definition of God was that phrase, ever new bliss. And that was something that, Master made original contributions in the way that the teachings are expressed. And one of them was to add the phrase ever new, because Satchidananda was ever existing, ever conscious bliss. But Master added ever new bliss, which is fascinating when you think about it, because and this is all just me talking about what the masters tell us, you enter into that state of bliss, you're in that state of bliss for eternity. And the average person who just spends their time doing things that are exciting, that are ever changing, you think, how could it be enjoyable to just be always the same? So Master has that little part, that ever new bliss, which is just, it's one of the many, many sort of just concepts that a person can just meditate on for a really long time. What would that mean? A state of bliss that ever keeps renewing itself. Interestingly, Master, in some letters to Rajasi, which are not widely published, but for various reasons I've seen some of them, he talks to Rajasi about, essentially, now that you're in a state of perfect samadhi, here are some fun things that you can do. And I don't mean to be disrespectful by putting it that way, but it's just different ways that you can meditate, different ways that you can experience the presence of God. There's such a huge world on the other side of on the other side of having transcended our ego definition. I have always thought of it, because how would I know? That somehow it's just like it's an absolute point, and after that, what? I don't know. So when then Master's talking to Rajasi about all these things that you can do, I have no idea what any of that really is. I had a very interesting experience with Swami, which has been something that's really influenced my thinking. Just a conversation with him. It started when we were on one of our pilgrimage trips to India, one of our last trips. Swamiji had already moved to India, so it was after 2003. I think we only did 2 more trips, I think, after he moved. For 20 years, every year or every other year, I and 3 of my friends, we would lead a 28-day pilgrimage trip through India. They were great experiences. And at the end, we started going to Badrinath, which is this up 10,000 feet in the Himalayas, where there's a statue that looks like Babaji, and it's a fantastic place. And there's a lot of sadhus who live there, and they live even above Badrinath. You climb a little bit. Um, and we went to visit this man whose name was called Boxwala Baba, and that was the word American word Boxwala, because in the winter, when all the other sadhus would come down to a lower elevation, they moved the whole temple down to a lower elevation because the snow at that height is so deep. He would go into a state of cosmic consciousness, of suspended animation. He would put his body, he would enter that state inside a closed metal box. And then he said he would go, and in his astral form, he would spend that period of time with Babaji. And then he would only come back to his body when the weather had changed and you could again live at that height. Well, we went to see this man. I'd never seen him before. It was a little kutir, a little tiny cottage at about 11,000 feet. And it was just this little place, and we're looking out at this view of the Himalayas. I'd never been in a place like that in this lifetime, but it just felt so at home to me, is the only word I can use. All of Badrinath felt so at home to me. And then he talked about these experiences with Babaji and all of that. And then later, we were back in Delhi, and I was talking to Swami Kriyananda, and Swami had heard about this man and asked me what was my impression of him. What did I think? And I told him about the whole situation, that there was just so much that was happening that I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell what was this life, what was past life, what was the darshan of this holy man, what was just my own past life memories. I couldn't separate any of it. But I tried to say, but sir, he talked so casually about just entering that altered state, leaving his body in the box, going off to be with Babaji. He just talked about it so easily, so naturally, as if it were so natural. And I had presented that as a suspicious thought, just slightly, like I didn't know what to think of it, because these seems like things you should talk about, with this great sort of awe and excitement. And Swami said, well, at a certain point, it simply is natural. And that was that has been such an interesting phrase to me. It's that, like, why would that not be our natural state? And when that is our natural state, it is our natural state, and it seems perfectly reasonable to us. It's only someone who's standing in another spot where it seems different to us. And in that same context, I had a satsang. I don't know what the timing was. It was afterwards. I was giving a satsang to a group of people in Bangalore, and I was the first time I'd visited that city. It was an Ananda group there, a very lovely group of devotees, and we were just getting acquainted. So they were asking me, how did I meet Swami? How did I come to Ananda? And I told them about meeting Swami in 1969 when I was 22, just making this decision and eventually just liquidating everything I had, leaving everything behind, and going to live at Ananda Village, this very primitive at that time ashram place, isolated in the rural area. And I just turned my back on everything and went there and never looked back. And one of the Indian devotees said to me in that way, "And what did your parents think?" And I didn't want to exactly imitate them because that didn't seem fair, but my answer was, I never thought to ask them. And it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Oh my gosh, they all just were like, really? You just, so like, didn't consider your parents, I wasn't being rude. It's just, I said, I'm American, partly, but also it wouldn't have mattered. And in their culture, which I, of course, understand more now, the relationship is much stronger. The obedience is much deeper. But you see, it seemed perfectly natural to me because my soul knew what it was doing. And one of the reasons I didn't ask my parents was not out of disrespect, but in a sense, out of respect, because I wasn't going to do what they said. So there was no point in putting us in the awkward position of my having to defy them, because there was no chance that I wasn't going to do it, because my soul knew. But you see, it wasn't even slightly unusual to me to do that. I'd been waiting my whole life to find a meaningful way of life. And when the door opened to me, I was going to walk through that door, to leave everything behind, to not have my parents' support, to not know where the money was going to come from, to, turn aside career possibilities, which I wasn't following anyway. Just, well, at a certain point, it's just natural. But not to the people I was talking to, but to me. And when Bhaktiwala Baba talked to us about just going to spend that time in the Himalayas, well, that's just what he did. Why would he make more of it? Because at a certain point it's natural to you. And this kind of like illustrated what it means to actually change your consciousness, not merely to change your behavior, which is often a good step. I mean, no harm. I try to be nice. I'd rather be nice rather than not nice. And when I'm careless in the way I speak, I try to change my way and discipline it. But far better is to have the consciousness that causes you spontaneously, without any forethought, that your natural response is a spiritual one. And, we're doing this whole series about Master's characteristics, and Swamiji has done a beautiful job of delineating those qualities that that made Master so extraordinary. But part of the factor that made Master so extraordinary was this was just natural to him. It didn't seem unusual. His spontaneous way of relating to life was like this. And I've mentioned this in this context before, that I learned that same thing about Swamiji, that it was his consciousness that was different. I've used the example of, in all the years that I knew him, and God knows I tried his patience a lot. He never made reference to the fact that I was younger and had so much less experience than he had. He always just treated me as a peer and worked with me as a peer. I didn't consider myself a peer, so the way I related to him was more. I deferred to him eventually, but not always as quickly as I might have. But I gradually learned that what I thought for Swami was this wonderful self-control was just, I finally figured out, was his perception. When he looked at me, he didn't see a person who was 2 decades younger than him. He saw a soul. That was all. And what difference does it make what age the body is? When a saint is born when Jesus was a baby, when Jesus came into a baby's body, he wasn't less an avatar just because he was in a baby body. His full consciousness was present. And for Swamiji, he often said age, the phrase he used, which I loved, was age is just a completely trivial definition of a person, physical age. Because you're an old or a young soul, you're born with the consciousness you have. So when we hear and see these qualities of Master, we have to understand this was natural behavior to him. And when we ourselves are trying to emulate these qualities, it isn't just a question of disciplining ourselves to behave properly, which is a good idea. It's better to consciously discipline yourself than to be just unbridled emotionalism and chaos and egotism. But what we really want to do is we want to change our perception. Because when we actually change our perception, and we actually do see people as souls, and we do, as we talked about yesterday, we laugh easily and all of those qualities, and we do respect other people, then it's just natural. Energy flows. This is why the saints and the masters can be so childlike, because they don't have to work. They just are. I mean, a child isn't childlike. A child is a child. They have this enthusiasm for things that is just so, it's so delightful. It's so charming the way they can just enjoy and laugh and you just have so much fun with things. They don't have to try. It's natural to them to do it. And so that's what we have to cultivate. Um, when when we were working on the movie Finding Happiness, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. I believe it's on Netflix, and I think it's other places you can get it. There's other movies with a similar name. Happiness was a very popular title in 2012 when we titled that movie. Finding Happiness, it's a story about Ananda. It's a story of Ananda, the Ananda communities, and it has within it, um, I'm never going to get to this quality, so don't even just think I'm going to, because I'm not. I'm just going to finish here now. I kept thinking I might, but no, I'm just going to finish where I am. Um, what that movie also has in it, it was filmed in the summer of 2012, summer and fall. Swami Kriyananda appears in that film in one of the, there's tons of film of Swamiji, but it's mostly face on with Swami, and he's giving a lecture. There's a wonderful bit of B-roll that floats around on the internet, and also, but this movie is one of the places where Swamiji is just himself. Even though we were filming and we had a particular destiny, we had a starting point and an end point for each scene. And there was an actress who was being the foil as a journalist. Um, Swami developed a genuine friendship with this actress, and the scenes between them are not acting. They're just having conversations. So the end point of it is Swamiji's energy is really magnificent. And it was 9 months later, he was out of his body. So now I had a reason for bringing it up, which I want to say. Oh, yes. Um, I got drawn into helping make that film. The woman who was producing it, Shivani, uh, they were planning to make that film, and I have a tiny little background in theater. I mean, like high school background, but theater was the only thing in life I ever enjoyed. Really, I really loved doing until I got to Ananda. And Shivani came to stay in my house. But all the movie projects were happening with Swami in Italy, and they weren't for me. I couldn't get into them, even though I really wanted to get into them. And then Shivani came and stayed in the house, and we arranged to have a play date. We were going to have a play date. And I came downstairs, and the play date turned out to be that Shivani had the whole outline for the movie laid out on the table. We had a 5-day play date where we went over everything that movie was going to be. And so I got into the project, and it was really fun. Um, and at the very end, when it was almost finished, one of the last scenes, we decorated the sort of stage area with all this beautiful flowing pieces of fabric and beautiful color, sort of like a giant parachute, multi-rainbow colored parachute. And our whole choir was wearing their choir outfits with these beautiful colored dresses and colored scarves, and the men had beautiful shirts. And we stood under the rainbow colored canopy, and they sang Swami's songs, which, there's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountain, and all the world is my friend, and all these wonderful, upbeat, gorgeous songs. So that's the closing scene. We were so pleased with it. And when it was time to do the director's cut, and then they were going to actually have focus groups to talk about the movie in Los Angeles, where some of the people were working. For some reason, I was the only one from Ananda who was available to go and be part of those sessions. So I'm there with all of the publicity people and the director and just these various folks that Shivani had assembled to make this whole thing happen. And we go through the focus group, and then the next morning we meet in some coffee shop, super Hollywood scene. And I'm sitting there, and one of the guys, he sort of looks around, like this, and to make sure that I'm all by myself, that there's not a single other Ananda person near, nobody's going to know my answer. And he sort of says to me, "Do you guys really do that sort of thing?" And I said, what? What? And then I realized he was talking about the choir at the end. I said, you mean dress up in rainbow colors and sing happy songs? I said, yeah, we do it all the time. We didn't do it just for the movie. We do it all the time. And it just kind of like, they were nice people. They were very nice people, but they kind of rolled their eyes like, you've got to be kidding. But no, that is what we do. That's what we think of as fun. Because it's not like we discipline ourselves to do this. It's like we really are childlike in our spirit. We've separated ourselves enough from what the world thinks is to be sophisticated. And I remember talking to this man, and his behavior was confusing me. I couldn't quite figure out what was motivating him. And we had a conversation, and this is the first time I'd ever really thought about this, because he'd had to survive he had more of a career in the world, whereas I never did. I mean, I just never did. I camped out on the edge of life. I met Swami, I dove into Ananda, and I never looked back. But he just commented the phrase, it's necessary always to appear like you're on top of things. To be a little bit shrewd was the actual word he used. And I really thought about the American temperament especially. To be gullible is really, in the American culture, it's not what you want. You never want to be taken advantage of. And I remember, I mean, when he said that phrase, I realized a phenomenon about speaking to American audiences. And now in my life, not like Swamiji, but I've been with other cultures a little bit at least. But in America, people have a tremendous amount of heart. And so when we would do a program and we would dress in those rainbow colors and sing those happy songs, people would feel it and they would be very happy. And Swami would speak, or sometimes even when I would speak, people would be so enthusiastic, and they would just come and tell you how much it meant to them. And people would weep with the experience of sort of finally finding kindred spirits in this world and feeling this energy. And they would just say their life was changed from this moment, and you would never see them again. Because they would go home and they would worry about it. They would go home and wonder, maybe they'd been hypnotized, maybe these people aren't really what they seem. I don't want to be hasty here, and it's too good to be true, and I certainly don't want to be thought of as gullible. I have to be a little bit shrewd like that. Because that's being childlike. Americans have what Swami once was characterizing the way people speak language, and he said, the American accent is outraged innocence. That's what he calls it. He was so adept. When you travel, when you sort of hear this certain American tone of voice, outraged innocence, why don't things everywhere work like they work in America? Just kind of. One of my Indian friends said to me once, I was in India when America went to war with somebody. And my Indian friend just looked at me and said, oh, you Americans, you're always at war with somebody. And I thought, oh, Lord, it's so helpful to see yourself from the outside. But even though there's this kind of Boy Scout energy that characterizes our country, for better or for worse, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, we're still wanting to be shrewd. And childlike is what we need to be spiritual. When Swami was a child in Romania, he lived in an enclave, which was an Anglo-American enclave within Romania, because his father worked for an American oil company. And there was a small group of children, a band of children. And then this sort of other group of American children moved in. And he said, and they all these little kids were trying to be important. And Swami said he just thought to himself, even as a child, what's so important about being important? It's just, why are we always trying? Why can't we just be as we are? Little children in front of God. And I know I talked about this one a day and a half ago about being childlike. So we'll consider this a supplement to quality number 23. Master was childlike. But it's to be childlike really in our hearts, not just in our behavior, but in our deep expectations of life. And that's why we always pray to Heavenly Father and Divine Mother. I mean, it's not just being sentimental to do that. It's because when we begin to think about it like that, when we begin to realize that even our human parents are symbolic of this all-pervasive, unconditional care that the world itself is giving out to us. I remember, not the world, but the universe, the cosmic mother, the cosmic father, the all-wise and all-comforting vibration. Let me see where I was with that. Just a moment, I have a thought. There was a time in my life when I had to make some serious decisions about whether I was going to really trust certain people in my life, just really make decisions that were based on the character of the people I was with. And I had reason to trust their character. There was no reason why I shouldn't, and that trust was well placed. But I also realized that human nature is ever unreliable, and even the best of people, things happen. Accidents, death, karmic shifts, just things happen. And people with the best of intentions, including me, can make promises, even take vows, but then find that it's not possible to keep them anymore. So nothing in this world can be depended on to remain fixed. So either I live my whole life protecting myself against the uncertainty of this world, or I do as Swami said, I trust no one. He said, I don't mean that negatively, but what I trust is that whatever God sends me will be just what I need. And I remember making a very conscious decision that my behavior was as if I trusted people, but my heart was that I trusted God. And that if through these people he sent me disappointment or whatever it might come to me, he would also give me the strength to go through it. And he would never, my Heavenly Father loves me, my Divine Mother loves me, and they would never put me in a position that was difficult unless there was a divine gift on the other side of it. And this is the childlikeness of a saint. It's not the naive expectation that an uninformed little baby can have, not knowing what life can give. The childlikeness of a saint is to actually know everything that life can give and realize that on the other side of it, Divine Mother is waiting, and she's waiting to fill us with more than anything else in this world can ever give us. These are the guidelines that step by step lead us, the Master's promise, to that ever new bliss. God bless you, my friends.